Hello and welcome. My name's Bradley Marcus. Welcome to the Passing Moments of Existence podcast, first episode ever. So we're going to figure this out and see how well we can make this work today. I have a very special episode for you today. It's very exciting. It is on the topic specifically about Buddhist perspectives on finding comfort amidst health challenges and addressing that feeling that some people who may be religious get when they hold faith in Jesus Christ or other deities and holding their hand, walking them through these health challenges, and how we can reframe this within this Buddhist philosophy. Background, this topic was introduced to me by a follower on my TikTok, and they sent me this question. Hey, I have a question if that's okay. When you are a Christian, then you have this feeling of security and belonging that you have, that's someone who is always there for you. But now that I'm starting my practice in Buddhism, I often feel so alone. I feel like I have to do it all by myself. Do you have something that would help me with this feeling? Thanks in advance. I asked a follow-up question to make sure I understood exactly what she was talking about. And I wanted to clarify, why is it important to you to have someone there for you? Why do we want to have an entity like Jesus Christ walking us through these health issues? She responded, well, I had surgery about 15 years ago and developed sepsis and was near death. Doctors couldn't do anything for me, and the people in my family couldn't deal with it. In this situation, it was very comforting for me to believe that there was a God who held me. I can't do this anymore. I can't believe in this anymore, but I miss that feeling. Do you have the same feeling with the Buddha, or how do you cope? Do you cope in another way? So while it may be very comforting at times to have faith in some other entity, in Buddhism, we have more of a unique approach that doesn't really address this fear in that way. Instead, we address the uncertainty and fear with health and specifically our mortality in a much more natural, realistic way. Some of the concepts that we're going to be talking about in today's podcast is the nature of self, impermanence, and then specifically liberation from attachment and acceptance. Now, let's start off by answering this question in a more traditional Buddhist perspective. There's something called the triple gem. The triple gem is something that a lot of Buddhists will pay homage to or take refuge in. The triple gem simply represents the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. The Buddha is the teacher, the Dhamma are the teachings, and the Sangha is the students. Now, these can be somewhat similar to the idea of Jesus by your side. However, in Buddhism, we shift our reliance. We don't necessarily rely on these things, but rather we pay respect, we pay homage, and we pay refuge to them. This looks different compared to what we might see in Western religions. When we pay refuge to the Dhamma, the Sangha, and the Buddha, what we're really doing is acknowledging that these truths will hold us and keep us up in these tough times. It's very different than looking towards the Buddha to take us with him. Remember, the Buddhist path is an individual's path in the end. The individual has to make those steps for themselves. The Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, or any bodhisattva, none of those entities can do anything for an individual. The individual must walk the path themselves. So again, we shift this reliance on these other entities onto ourselves instead. The Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, in a lot of ways, really are just one thing, which is the Dhamma itself. The Dhamma being these teachings, this truth, this way of life, this nature. And in a way, they are what we are all here for. The Buddha is teaching these teachings, and the Sangha or the students are learning these teachings. Here I want to quickly mention a sutta, the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, which specifically talks about islands unto themselves. We must be these islands. We must be the self-reliant. We are the islands, and we rely on wisdom and insight rather than external salvation. It's not that you're relying on the Dhamma to take you by its hand. Instead, we are just acknowledging the truth of the Dhamma, the truth of this wisdom that will lead us to liberation. Let's talk a little bit more about the body and the nature of self specifically. Now, often we as humans are very, very attached to our bodies, and that can be a problem. It's important to understand, though, that we ourselves are not our bodies, as well as our feelings, our perceptions, our mental formations, our consciousness. All of these things are not us. And this is called the five aggregates. And we will talk about that in future episodes. But the main thing that we have to remember is that in the Anatalakkhana Sutta, we talk about specifically that we are not this body. Humans are very attached to our bodies. We hold them so dear. We constantly are trying to make them look better. We are constantly trying to live longer. And while I'm not saying that you can't do those things, it's important to understand this one very, very somewhat kind of depressing fact that we are all going to perish at some time. These bodies, this hand that I hold up here, is not going to be this hand forever. As all things do, it will change, it will deteriorate, it will get old. This is something not many people like to think about. Totally understand that. Even in the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha talks about meditating on this fact, meditating on the fact that our bodies are impermanent, meditating on the fact that these bodies are just meat sacks, right? So that's really important as well, because in the Dhammapada, verse 277, all conditioned things are impermanent, including this body. Now, through deep meditation, you actually start to have acceptance of this fact, and you start to see it on a deeper level than me just explaining it to you. So always remember that you can yourself meditate on your body perishing. It can be quite scary for some, but it is actually a key practice to any Buddhist teaching and any Buddhist practice for that matter. We can apply this in this teaching by really erasing fear of health deterioration because we're not attaching to the body. We can look at it in a few different ways. Number one, this body is not us, right? But also, if you really want to look at it from the rebirth perspective, we can start to go in a bit deeper and explain that, this body, while it is not me, I will be reborn in the future. And this can be comforting to some. If you don't believe in rebirth, then this doesn't necessarily apply or might not be able to comfort you. But as a practicing Theravadan Buddhist, I recognize that I will be reborn again and have been reborn again. And what's really interesting about that is not only have we experienced this deterioration before, we've also experienced death before, which could also make it a bit less scary. I think that we don't really acknowledge our passing, that one day we will pass. And because of that, we run into these problems in our daily lives where we get really, really worried about being sick. But if you do deep meditations, a lot of people report seeing their past lives. And so as we dive into our psyche, our consciousness, quiet the mind, and dive into our being through meditation, we can find comfort in that knowledge that we will be reborn. But what's really interesting is that we've been reborn so many times. I'm talking countless bodies that we've experienced. I want to quickly talk about mindfulness and different studies that have supported how mindfulness and meditation can help reduce stress, and specifically the attachment to these physical sensations. So for example, there have been studies that know that and explain that as we start to focus our mind in ways on mindfulness meditation, we can start to retrain the way that we are attached to our bodies. So for some, they might accept death and accept the fact that their bodies will deteriorate more easily than others. And if you're someone who struggles with that, well, then you can use mindfulness meditation practices to come to a place of acceptance over time, right? We're building a neural network when we do these meditative practices. So that's really important as well. Let's move on now, though, into what I wanted to get to in the end here, which is just the overall acceptance. So we are working here, right, through the teaching of non-self, that this body is not me, through the teachings of impermanence, that whether we like it or not, this body will deteriorate. And then through the teachings of rebirth, that we have been reborn again and again to get to this point where we are right now, which is acceptance. We know that our attachment, our clinging to our bodies, our clinging to trying to always stay young, our clinging to the idea that we should never get sick and we will always be healthy, that will lead to suffering, that attachment within itself. We can look at the Upadana Sutta, which explains how clinging to the self leads to suffering. So that acceptance can be really comforting. And at times it actually might be a bit difficult to get to. But as you go into these deep meditations, as you work on accepting these truths that I've mentioned in this video, it becomes a bit easier, and it becomes easier and easier. That will become easier over time as we train the mind to get a little bit more relaxed over time. I'd like to just dive in now to a little bit of an analogy. This moment, this body, this existence is really like a wave in the ocean. The wave comes and the wave goes. Not only that, but when the wave comes, is the wave part of the ocean or is the ocean part of the wave? When the wave goes back down, are you able to pinpoint where that wave is in the ocean? All of these questions are important to really contemplate on, because when you start to look at it through this perspective, you start to see things in a different way. Now, while in Buddhist practice, there is no oneness, right? There is no one entity that we are part of. Instead, we talk about this illusion of self, this illusion that we have created this thing that is me, that is Bradley, that is you watching this video. This body, oh, is it me? Yeah, this body's mine and my thoughts are mine. When in fact, they are all just illusions that make up this concept of self, and that the concept of self doesn't even exist. Furthermore, if we try to say, well, we're just part of this one entity, this universal consciousness, well, that right there also doesn't do it justice, for one. But for two, the fact that you are saying that this thing is here, this is oneness, then there has to be something over here that's not oneness. In order for that to be that, there has to be some sort of separation. So in reality, that's not true either. And now we're talking a little bit more about a non-dualistic approach here, and Buddhism can be and is often viewed as non-dualistic in a lot of ways. We're not going to go into too much more detail about that, but I want you to just understand that there's this illusion of self, and in Buddhist practice, that's what we're dissolving. They're dissolving this illusion of self. So let's talk a little bit about practical steps for acceptance. What you can do in these moments of fear, these moments of perhaps anger or sadness, is simply allow these feelings to arise and pass on their own. Back to the wave analogy, the wave will come and the wave will go if you let it. A lot of times, though, we cling to these ideas, we cling to these fears, or we push them away. We try to think our way out of it. We try to come up with some solution. And while it's good to always stay on top of our health, it's good to be healthy and continue to be good people and practice being generous, being kind, being wholesome and loving. That does not mean that one day we won't eventually lose this body. It's a fact. And the more that we can work towards accepting that fact ahead of time, the easier it will become as we get older and as we lose this vitality that we all hold so dear. So what you can also do is use mindfulness to stay present and observe these physical sensations and their emotions and see how transient they are in nature. They're always going to come and they're always going to go. I'd like to also talk a little bit more about reframing comfort. Thinking about how we should not necessarily need, as Buddhists, we don't need any external entities to hold peace. A lot of people find that Jesus Christ or these, outside gods or creators, so to speak, that are going to lead us to salvation really bring them a lot of peace. I think that's why a lot of people are Christian, is they do find a lot of the peace in Jesus Christ. Now, I myself have never been someone who has ever bought into that dogma or belief. And that's what I've always loved about Buddhist practice, is there are no dogmas. So what we're doing here is we're flipping it and we're pointing that spotlight back at us. We're looking at ourselves for that peace. And in fact, we're not only finding that peace within ourselves, but we're finding that peace in reality. We're finding that peace that is here right now, as long as we tune into it. So this acceptance that I speak of, this peace, arises from insight into truth. Arises from insight into truth that we are not our bodies and that all things are impermanent. Moving forward, though, we can talk a little bit more about the scientific research that mindfulness meditation does enhance acceptance. It does, and it does also reduce anxiety, even in the face of illness. As we continue to meditate more and more, we find that peace within ourselves. We find that acceptance within ourselves. I myself have had to find peace in many different aspects of my life, and I've used my Buddhist practice to do that. One example was when I lost one of my very good friends. He passed away in a very freak accident. And to this day, it's very weird for me to think back to that, because he was 28 when he passed away and he was older than me. I'm now 31. It almost feels like he's frozen in time. I went through all the 5 stages of grief, but what I decided to do in those times was be present with those emotions, the anger, the fear, the bargaining, the denial, and the acceptance. As time passed on and these emotions continued to arise, I would experience them, but I would also experience them completely. Some people like to push these feelings away and drink, or maybe go distract themselves with a movie. Not me. I wanted to be present with them. I wanted to honor those feelings and honor him, my friend, in that experience. And by doing so, I think I really processed those emotions, and I did not put them down into my psyche or my subconscious to later come up as trauma. And to this day, I hold myself in high regard for being able to do that, to look at that grief head on, process that grief, and come to acceptance with that grief. Was it comfortable? No. Another part about Buddhist practice is that we recognize dukkha. Life is not comfortable. This body is not self, but this body will also deteriorate and age, and there will be things that will be uncomfortable, but it's our reaction to those experiences. While it may be comforting to have this outside entity like Jesus Christ to guide us to a salvation, we don't need that. We can have this, if you want to look towards the Sangha, the Buddha, and the Dhamma, yes, we can rely on them for support. But remember, it is us that is walking the path. And in that way, it is so noble. It is so beautiful. It is so true in itself that it would be on us. It would be on us. It's not as easy, in my opinion, as just accepting something, accepting perhaps someone else as my savior to be saved. I believe I need to be the one to do the saving, because that makes me the best person I can be to help others, to be kinder to others. As we move forward, we could talk a little bit now about how do we move forward without this fixed self? There is this dissolution of identity, right? Understanding that liberation, this liberation we speak of, this liberation from suffering, comes not just from releasing attachment to the body, but also the concept of this greater self. Greater self, non-self, non-dualism. There is this thing. Is it a thing? It's not a thing, and it is a thing. It's not a thing, and it's not a thing. That is what is. And that is being. And that's kind of where I want to end this. We could talk a little bit here about the Kachanagata Sutta. Kachanagata Sutta. There we go. Talks about the middle way. The middle way is what the Buddha taught that we should approach everything in our lives with. This includes eating, working out. This includes spending time with family. This includes spending time alone with friends. The middle way simply means that we do things in the middle way. Not too much, not too little. Don't eat too much, don't eat too little. Don't work out too hard, don't work out too little. You get my point. But in this sutta, it also talks about how we perceive existence. Specifically, we rest instead in the reality of what is. It avoids both existence and non-existence. Do we exist or do we not exist? Find your middle way within that. And that, my friends, is a great, great way to live life. Because what we're doing in that way is we're acknowledging that there is not something and there is something. And that in fact, it's ineffable. It's unable to speak to you what that actually means. The self, this body, this impermanence, all of this existence it just is. It's being. There isn't a greater self or oneness. It's just simply being. So, conclusion here. Remember that you can find comfort in Buddhism from insight and not reliance on external entities. The body is not self, and we are all impermanent anyway. We might as well start accepting it sooner than later. We don't need those external entities to help us accept. And we can accept, and acceptance will come as we dissolve this illusion of self and we start to live in the present moment more and more. So I hope you guys also take everything I say with a grain of salt, because as the Buddha said, ehipassiko, which means come and see. Don't just trust me based on this podcast episode. I ask you to please engage in mindfulness practices. And as you do and you get to strengthen the faculty of mindfulness, you can start to contemplate these teachings for yourself and decide if they are true. I want to also thank my follower on TikTok for this question. You know who you are. You will remain nameless, as I had told you. And I also appreciate you sharing this deep, deep personal question with me. It really made for, I think, a podcast episode that will help others. Remember, guys, you can look up some of these suttas, the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the Anatalakkhana Sutta, and the Kachanagata Sutta. Some scientific papers that I referenced in this video are specifically going to be Kabat and Zen J, which use an outpatient program in behavioral medicine for chronic pain patients based on the practice of mindfulness meditation, and Holzel BK, how does mindfulness meditation work? I want to thank you guys again for joining, and hopefully this will be part of the final cut, because I myself am doing this for the first time. So hopefully this will be a good video for you guys and a good podcast episode. You know where to find me on my socials. Please feel free to email me any questions for future episodes. May you be well. May you be free of suffering. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.